Greetings, I'm Bill Kleitke, and I'd like to welcome you to today's edition of Neighborhood Beat. Our guest today is Mr. Bryan Greene, who's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill. Nice to be here.
Well, thank you so much for coming back. It's been about a year.
Yeah.
And you were here about a year ago talking to us about fair housing, about all the things that HUD is doing in our neighborhoods. And I'm glad you could come back and refresh us.
Thank you.
Refresh us.
A lot happens in a year.
Amen. Amen. For those of our viewers who didn't catch the show, could you please tell us a little bit about the U.S. Department of HUD?
Sure. We are a federal cabinet agency, so we are part of the executive branch of the United States government. We have a presidentially appointed secretary, that's Sean Donovan, and my office, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, also has a presidentially appointed assistant secretary. That's my direct supervisor, John Tresvigna. And so I'm the career head of the Fair Housing Office. I've been there many years, ensuring the continuity of operations of our fair housing programs.
In other words, you're not a political appointee.
That's right. That's right. I'm one of the longtime career employees.
So you've seen, how long have you been with HUD now?
About 20 years.
20 years?
Yes.
Wow. So you've seen presidents and, frankly, assistant secretary bosses come and go.
That's true. That's true. But a mainstay has been the Fair Housing Act, which is actually older than I am, and that's the main law that my office enforces. And that law has been a bedrock for the whole time I've been there. But we at HUD have been doing a lot in the area of regulations and enhanced enforcement. And I look forward to having the opportunity today to tell you and your viewers about that.
Great, great. HUD touches people's lives in many ways, and frankly, probably mostly in ways they're not aware of.
That's true. HUD, of course, funds the Community Development Block Grant, which goes into communities and helps communities maintain roads, build developments, build ports. There's, of course, the public housing funds that keep our public housing authorities operating. There's FHA, which has become even more critical after the mortgage downturn. And, of course, there's the Fair Housing Law, which affects virtually every housing transaction in the country, ensuring that we have an open housing market that does not permit discrimination. And
your job as you said, career head of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity is to make sure that that fair housing and equal opportunity actually exists through the land. That's a big job.
That's true, and making sure that we at HUD have the resources to fulfill that mission. So I oversee obtaining our human resources to do that, getting our budgets to provide to the states and to the localities, making sure the states and the local governments have sufficient funding to enforce their laws that are equivalent to the Fair Housing Act in many jurisdictions. And also making sure that fair housing advocates who have experience investigating cases and doing testing, that they get funds so that they can do community-based testing throughout the country.
Let's first talk about the law. What is the Fair Housing Law?
As I said, it's a law that goes back many years. 1968 is when it was passed, immediately after the assassination of Martin Luther King in April 11th, actually, 1968. The Fair Housing Act was signed into law by President Johnson. And the main purpose was to prohibit discrimination in virtually all housing-related transactions. So rental, sale of housing, mortgage lending, homeowners insurance, the advertising of any housing or housing-related transaction. And, prior to the Fair Housing Act, you had the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which had prohibited discrimination in public housing or any federally assisted housing program. But the 1968 law was key to making sure that private landlords didn't engage in discrimination. And as we know, it's really those practices that prevent the mobility of different groups. So the original law made it unlawful to discriminate on the basis of race, dealing then principally with the discrimination African Americans were facing, but it's unlawful to discriminate against any person on their race. National origin, so if you're Hispanic or you come from
Italian,
Italy, you come from Ireland, that national origin has no basis in a housing transaction. The original law also prohibited discrimination on the basis of color, since race is sort of really not a true scientific concept. Race or color are virtually the same thing, but the law wanted to make sure that was covered. And religion, which, in this country we've always said people have the freedom to practice religion. The Fair Housing Law said you can't discriminate against someone on the basis of their religion. And then the law was later amended in the 70s to prohibit discrimination on the basis of gender, and that sort of corresponded with the women's rights movement of the 70s. And then the law was amended still further in the late 80s to prohibit discrimination against people on the basis of disability or because they have children. So taken all together, those are the prohibited bases under the Fair Housing Act.
Great, thank you, thank you. And since you've been doing this for 20 years, you've seen the great change that I guess. But the more things change, the more they remain the same in terms of discrimination.
Yeah, that's true.
What's the current state of housing discrimination?
Well, I would say for many years now, much of the discrimination that's faced is less obvious. And so while we still do see instances where people are outright told they're not renting to someone because they're black, and we had a case like that this past year where a housing provider would not let someone sublet their property because the person they were going to sublet to was black, and told him straight out that he wouldn't do that.
Plainly illegal.
Yeah. So we don't see too much of that today, but it happens. When we do see explicit discrimination today, it tends to be more so on other bases, where people might say no children. And that's still a newer provision of the law, and some people still will express that openly, more so in advertising, but verbally as well. We get the reports of that. We even have seen some cases recently where people were denied rental because they were women, where people explicitly said that. And so we see that, but more often we see situations where either policies tend to discriminate, tend to have a discriminatory effect on a particular group of people, even if on its face it might seem it might be neutral, but where when you actually look at who it statistically burdens, you can prove if it has no other purpose.
For example,
that it's discrimination. Yeah, so what we see sometimes in some housing authorities have been situations where housing authorities might have a residency preference, where they specifically state that they will not take applications or permit residency for people outside of a particular community, where when you look at the data concerning the community, the immediate community might have a population of 10% African Americans, but the surrounding communities where they're likely to get very many applications might actually be 40% African American. And so by having the residency preference, you're effectively excluding applicants disproportionately based on race. And so we see a manner of and when you see some policies, some occupancy standards policies that might say that they're limiting a 2-bedroom to 2 persons. They're not saying on the face that we want to limit the number of families with children, or that we don't want children here. But when you consider that the 3 or 4 person households who could occupy a 2-bedroom unit, the majority of households almost anywhere, but you would look at the statistics for a given community, and if the majority of those households are families with children, that would be a policy that has a discriminatory effect on families with children. And when that happens, and someone files a complaint like that with HUD, we actually engage and try to determine, well, what's the reason for the policy? And, maybe there's a legitimate reason, a lawful legitimate reason. But if not,
dismissed.
Yeah, right. But if not, that could be discrimination. So we see more of that. But, we still see policies that discriminate. In the area of explicit policies, this past year we were dealing with a number of lenders who had policies concerning women who are on maternity leave, where lenders, who in the past this really wasn't a big issue, but lately, especially in the downturn, lenders have suddenly said to women who are on maternity leave, we need evidence that you're going to return to work, and refuse to make the loan, refuse to consider the income that they made from that job that they have, that they're just on leave from, because they're on leave.
So they're treating maternity leave like a dismissal.
That's right. Yeah, and we actually have some cases here in the Baltimore area against some lenders that involve those fact patterns, where the lenders actually would not make the loan until they were back at work and could report to them and verify that they were now back at work.
That's a shame.
Yeah. So imagine trying to get a house that's on the market and you have to tell the seller, I got to wait until I go back to work. Or in the instance of some of these cases, women cut their maternity leave short and return to work so that they can close on a house.
Yeah, that's unfair and frankly immoral.
Yeah, 2012.
2012. How can someone find out more information about HUD and about their rights against discrimination?
Well, two ways. Of course, we're on the web, www.hud.gov/fairhousing is one word. And then if you're old school, if you like to call on your smartphone.
There must still be some people that do that.
Well, they have smartphones now. They can dial us, although there are no dials anymore. They can dial us at 1-800-669-9777.
Great, thanks.
So that's an 800 number that connects you to the office nearest you.
Great. And for our folks that are hard of hearing?
Yes. Well, we actually have TTY connection if you contact us through that.
Okay.
And then, of course, we are compliant with our website as well, so people can access via the web.
Right. And I know that the way HUD is organized, you have a Maryland office.
That's right.
Someone get in touch with your Maryland office.
Well, still the best way would be to access through the 1-800 number. And we like the 1-800 number because it also helps us know how many people are calling through and where those calls are going. But you can call through that number, and also the information is directly on the web. And people can file complaints on the web too. I think, I'm not sure if it's a majority now, but a large percentage of our case filings now come via the web.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That is a change. That is a change.
Yeah.
Yeah. That eventually you'll have a virtual.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Still too much paper.
Yeah, and it's a legal proceeding, so.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, it must be traceable.
Yes, and so we're doing a lot internally to actually expedite our cases by trying to figure out ways, at least at the stage when people are working on the case, to trade documents virtually. But you're right. Ultimately, it's a legal proceeding, and we put together a case file. But I mean, the process we go through is, we're trying to determine whether the law has been violated, and if there is a violation of the law, we will bring a case before a judge on behalf of the person who filed the complaint, free of charge.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. It's much needed. Much needed.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of rather new developments in the field of civil rights in the last year since we spoke, and I wanted to make sure that we talked about them. One was, of course, that Maryland has passed adding something to their civil rights law.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the areas that has been very key for us has been trying to do what we can to ensure that there is no discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. And so at the federal level, we've been, while we have not amended the Fair Housing Act, this federal law, which I've described, we have said as an agency that if you're going to participate in HUD-funded programs, you can't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. So while the U.S. Congress has not passed a law yet dealing with the broad housing market, as an executive branch agency, we're able to say that if you're going to participate in HUD programs, discrimination because of someone's LGBT background is not permissible.
That's wonderful. And as incidents have shown in Baltimore County in Maryland, and elsewhere in Maryland, much needed.
Yes.
Much needed to protect these folks.
Yes, and that rule just became effective 2 days ago.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great that HUD is moving forward in that. Another area, of course, is the whole area of mortgage lending discrimination. We've had a number of instances, and of course it's an industry in turmoil because of the recession and because of various illegal activities by folks in the financial sector, some of which have been prosecuted, some of which have not been.
That's right.
But I know that HUD is moving ahead and trying to bring folks to justice in that area too.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, I told you about the maternity leave cases, and the maternity leave discrimination seems to be an outgrowth of some of what's been going on, what had gone on in the industry, and now this retraction where people have swung back the other way, and loans that they always made without question now are, beginning to question and in a discriminatory way. But we also have seen some disability-related discrimination as well in the lending area,
really?
Where people's incomes being questioned, income that's secure is being questioned now because someone has a disability. But then we still have, race discrimination, national origin discrimination, and so we get those lending complaints as well. And then, scams. We still see scams, and many of these scams, the mortgage lending rescue scams, people present themselves as helping people who are facing risk of foreclosure, and they then actually make the situation worse and reap a profit in the process. But we see those disproportionately affecting communities of color. People targeting communities of color, people targeting the elderly. We had predatory lending in the first place, and we had subprime lending in the first place, which it took advantage of minority communities. And now on the back end, we see this. And
the latest example of people exploiting other folks.
That's absolutely right.
Could you give us, just before you pass on to some other things, a little bit about what people should look out for and what are their rights in that area, because it's something that definitely is affecting a lot of Marylanders at this point.
Well, I would say at the origination stage, if you are applying for a loan, first of all, shop. Compare lenders. You really need to do your homework there. So you should compare. But then, if you're getting farther into the process, if you find that the interest rates that lenders are offering you, or the fees that they're offering you seem out of range from what you had seen before, then begin asking questions. And it's interesting because, coming out of the mortgage downturn, you hear a lot of people blame the victims. A lot of people who say that the downturn was the result of people making loans to folks who weren't qualified or should never have been qualified. What we see through a lot of the data are people who are qualified and are qualified at better rates getting bad loans then that they can't pay. And had they known that they could shop more, or had really they not been taken advantage of, they would still be in their homes. But
could have gotten something affordable.
Right. Well, yeah. So consumers think that the lenders are the professionals and that they're going to be treated well, but it's a consumer transaction just like any other, and you have to do your homework, and you have to ask questions if someone, starts changing the story, or starts changing the rates on you. And so that's one thing to be wary of. And I would say don't respond to solicitations.
Over the phone or in mail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And there's a lot of information regarding your deed that's available in at the county courthouse, and that's public. And there are some lenders who, based on that information, will send you notices. And we've all gotten these, and where they seem even official sometimes. We've seen some awful things. We've seen people pretending to be the Federal Housing Administration, and in fact, I think I've seen them use other names like Federal Housing Authority or something like that, pretending to be FHA.
Something that sounds official, but actually is just a scam.
Right, or they cite something that HUD said recently to create the impression that the letter's coming from HUD, but it's not. So just be wary of any solicitations. If you were not expecting that letter, I would just throw it away.
Rip it in half and throw it in the recycle bin.
Exactly. Lenders won't be happy with me on that. But hey, if you're the consumer, it's your choice. So if you're in the market, you go out there and do your homework and don't be persuaded by that.
Where can somebody do their homework? On the internet?
Internet's a good place. I highly recommend contacting a HUD-approved housing counselor. You can go to the web again to find housing counselors, or you can contact HUD
and type in. They could search for HUD-approved housing counselors.
Yes, HUD-approved housing counselors. If you go to the HUD website and you get the information there, you at least know it's HUD-approved. If you look up and you see, yes, you're still on the HUD webpage and the list of housing counselors and the states, you at least know you're getting a HUD-approved housing counselor.
So it might be best to just go to www.hud.gov
yes.
and look for housing counselor.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So HUD.gov, housing counselor. Give us a call just the same.
And the nice thing is they're free.
Yes, that's right. They're free.
They're free.
I would even recommend at any step in the process that people consult with the housing counselors just to be on the safe and narrow.
Yeah, that's a good tip. That's a good tip. Disability is an issue that continues to be with us.
That's right.
And if anything, I know that it now constitutes a much larger percentage of discrimination complaints.
That's true.
What are the main things you're seeing?
Well, I would say disability complaints are about maybe 45% of what gets filed with us.
Wow.
So almost half of the complaints that are getting filed nationally are disability complaints. And I think, if you're a person with a disability, just to navigate this world, you need to know your rights. And I think people are better understanding their rights and now filing those complaints. And so we see those complaints. About half of those complaints usually involve some failure of a housing provider to provide an accommodation that a person believes is necessary. So it may be that they need a parking spot close to the front door, and the manager may have a first come, first serve parking policy, and someone with a disability may have to navigate the entire parking lot to get to the front door. Maybe they're walking on crutches or a walker. And exacerbating a health condition or maybe in inclement weather. It's not something they can do. And so the accommodation may be, in that instance, to let them have an assigned space near the door or closer space. So we get a lot of those complaints.
I love one of the slogans of HUD comes up every year with the slogan for Fair Housing Month. April is Fair Housing Month. One of them was, "It's only fair."
Yeah.
And to me, that is really the measure of all of the things that you've really been talking about, is that it's only fair. I mean, helping out somebody who has a significant health problem or a movement disability like that by giving them a space that's closer, that's only fair.
That's right. And some people get the disability rights part of the law confused. Because we hear housing providers who say, well, I want to treat everyone the same, and as a result, I'm not going to give this accommodation to this person with a disability. But when it comes to disability, the law makes very clear that a reasonable accommodation may be necessary in order to afford the person equal opportunity. Right. So in those situations, what the law is saying is, in order to provide equal access, you may have to do something different or make some exception to your policy so the person has equal access. But you mentioned Fair Housing Month. April is Fair Housing Month, and I want to tell your viewers that we do have an event in Baltimore on April 18th, and that's an event that HUD's Office of Fair Housing is co-hosting with the Baltimore County Human Relations Commission. And so
folks can find out about that by going on the web or
that's right.
giving HUD a call.
Right. Contacting us or the Baltimore County Commission.
I would be bereft of my responsibilities as an interviewer if I didn't ask you about the equal opportunity part of your job title.
Oh, yes. Well,
What does that involve?
Well,
briefly, in a minute.
Sure. It sort of picks up on what I was even saying in terms of people with disabilities, that the ultimate goal is equal opportunity. And so often people think of discrimination as the sort of mosaic prescription, thou shalt not discriminate. And so a lot of the law is that, you can't do this constitutes discrimination. But the goal of Congress was to create integrated housing patterns throughout the country and provide equal opportunity. And so there are some proactive things that are required as well. So the
to accomplish that.
That's absolutely right. So the Fair Housing Act actually states that the Secretary of HUD must administer programs in a way that promotes equal housing opportunity. And so towards that end, we as an agency, when we cite public housing or when we provide money to communities, we need to make sure that money does not go to perpetuate existing segregation, and that, in fact, it is seeding opportunities in less segregated environments. So, we need to make sure that the built environment, when it comes to low-income housing, is not going to result in minorities being limited in their housing choices based on race or national origin.
Absolutely. And they can go on the website to find out more about that.
That's true. Along those lines, I just want to say we do have a rule that's coming out that will help educate the HUD recipients on their responsibilities in what we call affirmatively furthering fair housing. But basically it means proactively promoting equal opportunity.
Great. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for.
All right. Well, it's been great.
Yes. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for here on Neighborhood Beat. I want to thank our guest, Mr. Bryan Greene, who's General Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity for the U.S. Department of HUD. Thank you, Bryan.
Thanks.
Keep up your good work for all of us.
I appreciate it.
And for Bill Kladke, I'd like to say thank you for tuning in. Let's try to be a good neighbor out there in all of our neighborhoods, and we'll see you next time.